Hey guys, it's the Super Saiyan Prodigy 1221 here. You can go and call me Andres or by my nickname Andy as well. Today I'm going to be talking about extenders that I have playtested with before in the Phantom Knights deck. I will go over the pros and cons of each extender and how useful I feel they are to the deck. With that being said, let's go over each card. So starting off with Kagamucha Knight, it is one of the most commonly played extenders I've seen people play in their deck. It is able to special summon itself whenever you normal summon level 3 monster, which you are able to do majority of the time, aside from maybe your hand traps or dragoon bricks that aren't level 3s. It special summons itself as a monster effect though, which is both a pro and a con. It's a pro in the sense that it can help chain block your tour guide effect, as they are both trigger effects, so you can choose your chain link order. When you chain block the tour guide, you're protecting her from hand traps such as Ash Blossoms, Herald of Orange Lights, or Gammas, which are very commonly played in the meta right now. That means your opponent will be limited to pretty much effect veilers or infinite impermanences to try to stop your tour guide effect from resolving. Even if they do negate the tour guide, you still got 2 level 3s on field to work with and can make your triple tactics talents live possibly, if you play that card. I'll talk about that card later, as it can be an extender sometimes, but it's more so or less like an anti-disruption card or a stabilizer in my opinion. But Kagamucha Knight is also dark fodder, which you can use as link material for your Rusty Bardiche if you need to. The downside with Kagamucha Knight is that it's vulnerable to a possible Appaloosa, Borealis, Savage Dragon, Solemn Strike, Gamma, or Herald of Orange Lights. And if you only open up Kagamucha Knight as your only extender, it can just end your turn sometimes if your opponent negates its effects. It can brick as well sometimes, as you only normal summon once every turn, so you could possibly open up 2 Kagamucha Knights in your hand, but overall I think it's the pros of Kagamucha Knight that outweigh its downsides. Moving on, we got Junk Forward. This is a level 3 extender I've recently started using. It's a free level 3 body you can get out on field. That's an inherent special summon, so it's harder to negate than the summon of Kagamucha Knight. And if you use this card in combination with Psychic Extender, it's very powerful, because you can go into Cherubini without using up your normal summon. An example would be if your graph gets negated after going into Cherubini, you still have your normal summon left to be able to try to summon out Rusty Bardiche. It can also bait out the Heretic Seal of Spears bounce effect when you are playing against Dragon Link, since they will try to bounce either the Junk Forward or one other card they have on field to get off the Heretic Seal of Spears tribute effect, so they can summon out a dragon monster. But it is also good in some scenarios where you can bait out a Gamma or Herald of Orange Light by them negating the summon of Tour Guide first enter effect, because that will cause the Tour Guide to be removed from field and it'll make your Triple Tactics talent or a Jump Forward live. But I would really only do that play if I know for a fact my opponent has Gamma or Herald of Orange Light in hand, because if you go Tour Guide effect and you try to bet on the fact they will negate it with Gamma or Herald of Orange Light, then you miss out the opportunity of getting Junk Forward on field as an extender to go into Cherubini. The only downside I really see with Junk Forward is that your opponent may not want to hand trap you early on, such as hitting your Tour Guide or Kagamucha Knight, as I see you have an extender out, which means they won't want to hand trap you to make your Triple Tactics talents live early, so you can rip your opponent's hand in order to combo off the best way possible. A small downside with Junk Forward is that it isn't a dark attribute, but most of the time you will go into Cherubini, which takes up generic level 3 monsters. So not too many downsides with this card though, and I feel it's a safer and more consistent alternative than Gilasaurus or the Speedroid package. Moving on, speaking of the Speedroid package, the package is very strong, but it can brick though. I feel like if Terratop was semi-limited, it wouldn't be very bricky, but because both Terratop and Takatomborg are 1-ofs, you do have an even shot of seeing either one. So Terratop alone can bait out pretty much any hand trap that's commonly played right now. Imperms, Ash Blossoms, Veilers, Gammas, and Herald of the Orange Lights. It makes your opponents go minus in card advantage sometimes, because let's say if they affect Veiler, Ash Blossom it, then they lose a card in hand, but you still haven't committed your normal summon out in that point, and then you can continue on to combo into like a Cherubini and do your Rusty Bardiche plays. And then if you resolve Terratop's effect and like your standard lines of plays that I just mentioned, you can get into Cherubini and Rusty without using up your normal summon, which is pretty insane because if they have no hand traps, you're at least getting off like a Rusty Dump and a Rusty Set Fogblade, which is insanely strong when you've decked it already that much, just without using up your normal summon. I feel like Terratop performs the best in non-Dragoon builds because Dragoon requires 3 hard bricks alongside with 2 soft bricks, which is too bricky in my opinion at that point. It's decent in the Requiem version of that deck as well, as in the Xyz Lane Toolbox version that got second at the DCS tournament, as you're not playing that many bricks in that version of the deck. Takatomvor can be hard sometimes to unbrick as well if you're not able to get out a Levier and Appaloosa sometimes. Depending how much you get hand trapped by your opponent, running Pot of Prosperity can help you in being able to see your Terratop more as well. Overall, I think this package is a bit of a high risk, high reward type of deal with a deck that is already too bricky. I'd really only recommend it if you're playing Pot of Prosperities as well, just so you can be able to search it out in a way and see it from your deck. So you can go ahead and since most people aren't going to Ash Pot of Prosperity, they're going to wait until you commit something on board that they'll want to Ash, and you can see it sometimes through the Pot of Prosperity excavations. Next we'll move on to the Psychic package. So the Psychic level 3 extenders are very strong to run in Phantom Knights. The Wielder and Tracker are inherent special summons, so they aren't as easy to negate as Kagamucha Knight is. They can only really be hit with like high impact cards like Solemn Warning or Solemn Judgments. Same kind of cards that can hit Junk Forward as well. Warning though isn't seeing that much play right now, and you might run into a Judgment from time to time. The Psychic extenders work well with Tour Guide sometimes, in the sense that Tour Guide can bait out an Effect Veiler or Ash Blossom, and then you can summon out one of the Psychic extenders to keep comboing off. The Emergency Teleport works good as well, as it can bait out an Ash Blossom or help you deck thin. It works well in conjunction with Pot of Prosperities in order to deck thin and see more extenders or side deck hate, or as fodder for Forbidden Droplets as well. Emergency Teleport can also bait out a Heretic Seal of Spears bound, since you're able to special summon it out in attack position. And it allows you to possibly bait out a Revolt if a Tri-Brigade player has an Appaloosa on field that's at 1600 attack points. If you special summon it out, the Tracker specifically, because it has 1600 attack points, you can attempt to crash it into the Appaloosa, and they probably won't want you to attack their Appaloosa because they want to get the most value out of their resources, so they'll end up trying to revolt it, which gives you one less interruption to worry about, and you haven't committed that many resources yet onto the field. You can also use the Emergency Teleport as droplet fodder, so you don't lose card advantage if your opponent chooses not to negate it. The downside though with the Psychic package is that you can't use them as link fodder for Rusty Bardiche, and also if you open up E-Telly as your only extender, it can be turn ending if your opponent decides to blind Ash Blossom you, but most of the time they won't do that. They'll wait for either the Graph effect or Rusty effect to hand trap you, so not too many downsides overall with the Psychic package. Next let's talk about the Danger package. So the Danger package can be weird but well rewarding. Using their in-hand effects does play around Appaloosa though, since it's not a hard once per turn, but it kind of signals to your opponent that you don't have much to work with in hand. It shows you are a bit desperate to draw into something good, so they might negate or interrupt your next line of play, such as summoning out a level 3 monster. Their in-hand effects can also end up discarding a Dragoon piece or BA name if you haven't gotten them out already. Their in-hand effects also play hard into draw, since you haven't search with the Cloak or Boots yet by the time you're using their danger and hand effects. So it limits on the advantage you can make and how much you can deck them through Droll and Lockbird. Although it's not bad to use their in-hand effects if you have good discard fodder, like a PK name or a BA name, and you have already gotten Cherubini out, or your Dragoon out as well. You can also help you draw into possible more extenders or your side deck hate cards. The danger monsters also conflict a bit with Pot of Prosperity, as you can't draw cards the turn you activate the Pot of Prosperity effect, so you don't want to use their in-hand effect unless they're the only cards you have in hand, so that way the rabbit can special summon out the snake, or the snake can special summon out itself. It can work to your advantage sometimes, as if you special summon out the danger monster and one of your psychic extenders, or you even have junk forward out already, so you can go into your sheer beating without using your normal summon, so you might have some backup in case your graph effect gets negated. The safest way to use the danger effects are either to leave them in hand, so they are guaranteed to only discard themselves, or using them as discard fodder for Torn Scales. But if you're playing Dragoon, that's going to be a bit harder to do so, since you want to have as much hand advantage as possible for the Omni Negate and other hand traps. The danger monsters are also dark, which can work well as link fodder for Rusty Bardiche. Overall, the danger monsters can work well as extenders, but you mostly want to play them as safe as possible in order to get the most precise benefits out of them, such as the Torn Scales discard to pay cost for its effect. Next, I will talk about extenders I don't feel are very good through my playtesting. Starting off is Gilasaurus. I feel like it's not needed in this deck. Gilasaurus just gives your opponent free advantage. The only time I could see this being useful if your opponent negates your Kagamucha Knight or gets rid of your other level 3 extenders on field before you go into your Shirabini. There's not too many powerful monsters they can get out aside from hand traps, but that's only if you're going first. But if your opponent hand traps you enough to where you can't establish a board to get rid of the free monster you gave to them, then they will plus an advantage as you're giving them free link material. And it's even worse if you're going second trying to use Gilasaurus. Like, let's say I'm doing against Tri-Brigade. I don't want my opponent to plus on advantage again through their graveyard effects off of their Tri-Brigade monster that they're able to bring out through Gilasaurus' effect, or get out a Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon if I'm going up against Dragon Lead. It's also an Earth attribute monster, so it can't be used as link fodder for your Rusty Bardiche. If it was Dark attribute, I could see it being a little bit more playable. If your graph effect gets negated, as example, that it would be possible to go into your Rusty Bardiche afterwards, but it's not a Dark attribute. So overall, I don't think this card is very good. Let's see here. Give me 1 second, my phone's ringing. Alright, moving on to Sangan. I don't think it's needed. I get the premise for it though, as you will more than likely see Tour Guide more as you run her as a 3-of in most versions of the deck, and Sangan itself allows you to search for hand traps or other extenders. I don't think Sangan is worth it though, and would rather get out a graph with my Tour Guide effect so I can go into Shirabini to start milling Phantom Knight cards to my graveyard. If you end up hard drawing Sangan, it'll conflict with other Phantom Knight cards you would rather normal summon that you could end up in hand, like a Torn Scales or Cloak, as the Phantom Knights cards get your engine going by using them as like link fodder for your link plays. You're only going to be able to gain advantage through Sangan if you use it as link material, since it has to be sent from the field to graveyard. It's like the downside of special summoning Torn Scales through its graveyard effect or a PK name. With a trap effect like a Fog Blade, you can avoid the downside of those cards since of them being banished, since Xyz materials don't count as being on the field. So using Sangan as Xyz material isn't going to be that useful. Sangan isn't good discard fodder for Dragoon either, as you won't be able to gain advantage by discarding it. I'd rather just not play it in the deck to keep my deck size lower so I can see more of my side deck cards like Anti-Spell Fragrances or other Floodgates. Things that aren't searchable by Sangan, but overall I think it's okay. It can search out hand traps, but I'd rather get my PK engine rolling to build up more negations as much as possible rather than just one negate with the hand trap. You can argue Sangan can search out higher impact traps games 2 and 3 like a Draw and Lockbird, but I want to keep my game 1 deck list as consistent as possible. Sangan is also Dark attribute, which is decent fodder for Rusty Bardiche as well. Overall, Sangan sounds like a decent card on paper, but I'd rather just play a different Extember. Alright, so moving on to Edgimp, Sabers, and libic. I think it's better if I go ahead and showcase you guys these cards in solo mode. So I get the premise behind them is then you want to put back like a Red Eyes Fusion or a Dragoon brick, but you end up going minus in a way. So let me go ahead and show you guys. Alright, so I didn't draw either one of them, but let me just go ahead and rearrange my hand to show you what I mean. And I'll be taking the screenshots as well as the after effects, or like the end board of what you can get to if you use Edgem Sabers, as opposed to just special summoning out the BA names from your hands into a zone share beanie points too. Oh yeah, and always remember, try to set a card before going into your share beanie, especially if you're going second, so that we can play around things like torrential tributes. But I mean, that's not being as commonly played as last format, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But yeah, so here we go. Also keep in mind, Edgem Sabers puts the card from your hand to the top of the deck as cost. So if they end up negating the Edgem Sabers, then you're just going to end up hard drawing into the same brick you were trying to unbrick. So you end up wasting a potential turn and drawing into a good card that could have saved your ass, you know? But let's assume, right, that your opponent doesn't negate it, right? And then another weakness with Edgem Sabers is if, let's say you go into your Rusty Bardiche now, this is going to be your 5th summon as well. So if they nib you right here, you're also going to be vulnerable to hard drawing that brick again. And then you're relying on your Rusty Bardiche effect as well to go off, so that way your deck ends up being shuffled so you don't end up drawing that Burning Abyss brick too. So with the Dragoon build, or if you do decide to run a build with Shade Brigadine in it, you can end on a board with like an Evil Swarm Nightmare or a Time Thief or Doer, as you can just search out the Stained Greaves with the Ancient Cloak, or the or an Evil Swarm Nightmare by making the Stained Greaves a level 4. But I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the Verte Anaconda with Dragoon effect. It's just like using Edgem Sabers just requires too much reliance on you being able to get out Rusty, its effect going through, like too much on like you're able to like shuffle your deck again in order to like not draw into it and use it up later. So I mean with this you at least end up with a Rusty Bardiche, a Dragoon, and possibly 4 other cards in hand if you go uninterrupted. Yeah. So, oh, I guess you can also search out a Fog Blade as well with the Silent Boots. Alright, so let me take a screenshot of that real quick and we'll compare end board. Alright, so I'm back. So here I have the board set up. I went ahead and reset my deck. And let's say you don't have any PK names, unfortunately, because I want to give a shout out to Julio Mendoza because I don't want to share off his combo. I think that he deserves the proper credit. It's because he has a video on his channel. It's a little bit outdated, not necessarily outdated, but like he uses like the Requiem follow up to like set up his combo when he's unbricking the Graph and Seer, but it works in the same aspect with the Dragoon build. So I want to give him credit where credit is due. So I'll put a link to his video in the description below, but I'm going to show you the pros and cons of using the Edgem Sabers in this video, and I want to give him credit to where you can unbrick Graph or Seer if you have one PK name to go into your Share Beanie. Also, so if you're not playing Edge and Sabers, make sure that if you have a set card available alongside with your BA name, special summon out the BA name first to his own share of Beanie Points too, and then set a card, because it'll help you play around things like Gamma or Herald of the Orange Light. I know I have the Ash Blossom here to negate that effect, but if they end up trying to Gamma you, then you just go ahead and pay this for cost, and you won't really lose that much card advantage. So for here, I would personally dump a Gloves, because they might want to nib me on my Rusty Bardiche summon, so I can't get a +2. This is assuming that they let this go through as well. Alright, so with this, you have one or two options. You can go into either using Tornscale's effect, discard a card in hand to set up a Brick Sword Disruption pop on your opponent's turn, or you can go ahead and I prefer to go into Leviair here to get out my Ancient Cloak, so that way I can have an Ancient Cloak ready for my next turn. And I'm not going to bother dumping the bricks. So let me go ahead and take a screenshot so I can compare the two again. Alright, so this was our end board for when we use the Edgem Sabers. This was our end board when we use the just to graph the special summon itself to the field just by its own natural effect. And you can see here that while we did end up with more cards in hand and on field through the Edgem Sabers effect, because this should technically be dumped, but this is just an example I'm going through. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cards on field, but our follow-up was very weak in that scenario because we were only able to dump an Ancient Cloak and then banish it to search out a Boots, and then special summon it out, and then make the Verte Anaconda from there. But with our end board with this one, we were able to get out a Tornscales, recycle back the Ancient Cloak for follow-up next turn, and we overall just gave us, even though we do have less cards on field and in hand to work with, we gave ourselves a stronger follow-up for next turn. So that's why I feel like Edgem Sabers isn't needed. Hold on one more second. And see, this is like one of the things where like I don't like about libic, because if you hard draw it, then you're not really unbricking anything at that point. I mean, I guess this is all gas though, so I mean, no hand traps if you're going second with this. I mean, I'd rather just play a free generic extender at that point. Like here, I would just dump a Gloves honestly in this scenario and get out my Rusty first. I'm starting to prefer that way just because I've noticed a lot of people like to nib me on the Rusty summon, so I can just go ahead and use the Gloves effect to dump a trap card and then bring out the Rusty Bardiche. But so you want to go Libic this scenario. I guess it can work, fortunately, since we have a lot of extenders in hand to go get out the Cherubini. I would dump a Gloves naturally in this scenario, but since I have the Pelusa out, I'll go for the Ancient Cloak. So we were very lucky this time, but let's see what happens when we're not lucky. Because a lot of times you can just end up drawing Libic and then another just a generic extender, and it won't work because let's say you end up drawing a PK name and the libic, well, libic's just gonna blow itself up, you know. So see some more test hands. All right. That's funny. I have both Edge Imp Savers and Libic in this test, like, demonstrating purposes deck, and it's funny I'm not seeing either one of them right now. 3 fucking droplets. Wow, that's Dylan Book RNG for you. 2 droplets that time. This is why I really like the... I'm starting to like really prefer the... See, this is Libic again. Oh well, but I just don't feel like it's needed. I want to give credit where credit's due. So I'll link a video to Julio Mendoza's description on how you can unbrick the Graph Seer in your hand by just having at least one PK name to go into Cherubini, because I don't like to steal credit for people coming up with combos I didn't come up with or useful tips and tricks. But yeah, a link to this video will be in the description below. Moving on to Foolish Burial. So Foolish Burial I don't think is needed in the deck. The Phantom Knights deck already does a good job on dumping cards to the graveyard. You really only want to mill the PK cards through your monster effects though in order to gain the most advantage efficiently. And you can already mill cards with Torn Scale, Cherubini, and Rusty Bardiche. I would just rather play another hand trap at that point than to play Foolish Burial. It's kind of dead already if you open up a bunch of PK names in the hand already. But overall, I can see why it may seem like a good idea at first, but in the long run, it really isn't. The best use I could see is if you possibly dump gloves early enough in your combo to play around Nibiru, but other than that, I feel the deck just naturally dump things to the graveyard, and I would rather play something like a hand trap or a level 3 extender over the Foolish Burial. So these next 2 spell cards I'm going to be talking about aren't necessarily extenders, but they can function as one sometimes. I will probably go more in depth about these cards in another video. I'm thinking about doing where I talk about non-engine support cards for the Phantom Knights deck. But anyways, Triple Tactics Talents can help you extend your plays in the sense that you can look at your opponent's hand and get rid of a hand trap that would have stopped you from gaining advantage. An example would be game 1 where you are going first and your opponent ashes your Tour Guide or Torn Scales effect and you look at their hand. It makes your opponent question themselves and puts pressure on them if they should let you look at their hand with the mindset that they will be able to break your board with 4 known cards in hand and 1 unknown after you pass your turn, or if they should just scoop because they feel they have a better chance at winning games 2 and 3 by not giving you the knowledge on what deck they are playing until game 2. It helps you get rid of your opponent's disruption in hand, such as key combo pieces or a hand trap, so you can extend your plays as best possible with what you know your opponent has in their hands. Its draw effect can help you draw into extenders, but keep in mind it is a bit risky because you haven't gotten your Dragoon, Burning Abyss, or Rank Up Magic Bricks out from your deck depending on which build of the deck you're playing. Triple Tactics Talents is very powerful, but it does rely on your opponent using a monster effect as a hand trap, where your opponent can play around it by using hand traps like Lancia during the standby phase or using infinite permanents, since those are trap cards. It's stronger as a going first card, as your opponent won't likely be able to negate its effect to look at the hand. Going second, this card is okay. It'll likely bat out some kind of negation from your opponent if you're trying to take one of their monsters, but it is a bit situational depending on what you're playing against going second. Also, a lot of opponents will be signing in anti-spell fragrances or Imperial Orders against you, decreasing the effectiveness of Triple Tactics Talents as well. If they're good players, they shouldn't really be signing in those type of cards against you because they know that Phantom Knights don't play that many spell cards, because all of the spell cards we play are like quick effects, like Forbidden Droplets, Twin Twisters, E-Tellies. The only really like normal spell cards we play would be Tactics, Reinforcement of the Army, or Red Eyes Fusion, but we normally side out the Triple Tactics Talents if we're going second, and they probably expect more hate from the regular opponent, siding in cards like Lightning Storms or like hate removal spell cards in that sense. Overall, I think it's better going first, but it can work depending on the matchup, going second. I would categorize this card more as a stabilizer card though, but it can function as an extender, and I'll probably talk more in depth about the card in a video I'm thinking about doing, but those are just my opinions on the card. Pot of Prosperity is a decent card as well. It can act as an extender if you're fortunate enough to see a level 3 extender if you evacuate one, or excavate one, sorry, from your deck. It can also act as fodder for Forbidden Droplets, so you can possibly not lose too much hand advantage if your opponent doesn't have some kind of negation for it, and it can also help you see your floodgates or side deck cards in games 2 and 3. Some of the weaknesses of this card though is that you may end up banishing extra deck cards that may be useful later on if you are using this card on your first turn during game 1. This card can also play harder into Lancia games 2 and 3, where Lancia naturally already hurts the Phantom Knights cards on their own since it keeps the deck from generating advantage. Lancia also just ends up making Pot of Prosperity useless if they activate during the standby phase. Pot of Prosperity also plays harder into Droll and Lockbridge, which hurts this deck since you won't be able to gain advantage through searching cards through the effects of Cloak or Boots. This card also is a bit of a double-edged sword in the Dragoon build of this deck. The Dragoon build already plays 5 bricks, and you can just end up excavating a Dragoon brick or a BA brick rather than a key card that can help you extend your plays. The Dragoon version can also OTK fairly easily, and Pot of Prosperity can prevent you from doing that. Let's just say you do play Pot of Prosperity in the Dragoon build. It could have possibly been an extra extender in your hands anyways if you didn't end up putting Pot of Prosperity in your deck, and since you did activate it that turn, you have to wait a turn because you would have been able to OTK if it wasn't for the half damage drawback. So it gives your opponent a chance to break your board where they might have had a good chance since you went second against them and had to use up resources to break their board. Pot of Prosperity can also be hard to fit into the Dragoon build, as players tend to generally play more than 40 cards in those builds of the deck, which makes you question if you should add it or if you think you will naturally see your starters or extenders more by not playing it at all, since you are trying to keep your deck size as low as possible as well, since you don't want to risk excavating your bricks when you play Pot of Prosperities. I feel like Pot of Prosperities might be better in the Requiem, Utopic Future Dragon, or Xyz Link Toolbox build used by the guy who got second place at the DCS, because the Banished Fodder is easier to choose for this deck, as you more than likely won't go for Utopic Future Dragon or Requiem in those builds. And if you're playing the Xyz Link Toolboxy version of the deck, you can decide which extra deck cards are useful in each matchup, because you can end up if you end up facing something like a Drytron board or an Appaloosa and Revolt against Tri-Brigade, you can use the Pot of Prosperities to excavate cards to help break boards like Droplets or Twin Twisters. And then since the extra deck is diverse in the Xyz Link Toolbox version build of the deck, it's easier to choose which extra deck fodder won't be useful to you. Like, let's say, Evil Swarm Nightmare is not going to be useful to you in the Sky Striker matchup because all they do is normal summon and link summon. Or you don't feel that Time Thief or Doer won't be that useful in the Drytron matchup because they'll just keep on special summoning their monsters, and Evil Swarm Nightmare would be a little bit better than Time Thief or Doer in that matchup because you can slow them down from going into Mu Beta Fafnir. I feel like Prosperity helped the player who got second at DCS by digging through their deck for things like a Terratop, and that version of the deck doesn't OTK as much as the Dragoon build, which is why the drawback of half damage wasn't that much of like an issue. Overall, I think Pot of Prosperity is a strong card to help you dig for an extender to get your combos going or to help you break an opponent's hand, but can also be a big drawback in games 2 and 3 due to it being more prone to side deck hate. Overall, I am just a little bit skeptical on its usability in the Dragoon build of the deck, but I can see how it's strong in other versions of the deck. Then more so or less, these next extenders are basically Phantom Knight focused. I see a lot of people decide not to run it or argue why you should run it, so here's my take on these two cards. So starting off with Shade Brigandine. So Shade Brigandine is a strong archetype extender that some people debate on whether or not it's worth playing. To get the most value out of this card, you should use the effect of Rusty Bardiche to set it, so it can serve as link fodder for your Appaloosa. It can also help you in situations where if your only Phantom Knight card name in hand is a Boots or Cloak and all you have is an extender, like one of your Psychics or Kagamucha Knight as extenders. The reason for this is because, let's say your graph effect gets negated and your it ends up getting Ash Blossomed or Gammaed or whatever, then you can go ahead and use the Boots or Cloak you use as link fodder for your Cherubini that's in the graveyard to search for the Shade Brigandine, so that way you can link climb and summon out the Rusty Bardiche, since the Shade Brigandine is a dark attribute in order to keep gaining advantage. It is useful in combinations with Link Spider as well. This is because in cases where you brick hard, where you don't have other level 3 extender, but you have at least one normal summon monster you're able to normal summon, you can just go ahead and summon out a monster and use Shade Brigandine to bring itself out, then link away for Link Spider to turn it into an effect monster. So you can go into Verte Anaconda and bring out Dragoon. There aren't too many downsides with this card other than it is a level 4, so you won't be able to use it as fodder for your Cherubini. But that also may not be a downside in some cases, as it can be used as Xyz material for an Evil Swarm Nightmare, Dark Rebellion Dragon, or Time Thief Redoer. And then Redoer is really good with Shade Brigandine as Xyz material, so it lets you bounce one of your opponent's cards on field without targeting. It does conflict with Infinite Impermanence though, so you should only be running one or the other, as Shade Brigandine can only be brought out the same turn it is set if you have no traps in your graveyard. Overall, I feel that it's a very strong extender and highly recommend playing it if you don't run Infinite Impermanence. Last but not least is Stained Greaves. I understand why some people don't like to play it. If you open up an extender and Greaves is the only PK name you open up with, it won't gain you easy card advantage in the graveyard like Ancient Cloak, Gloves, or Silent Boots would, but it's useful in the sense that if you hard open Silent Boots with another PK name in hand to go into Cherubini, then once you dump the Torn Scales with Rusty, you have Stained Greaves and extenders to work with the Torn Scales to go into an Xyz plays once you bring out the Torn Scales out through its effect, like a Levier or Break Sword, to keep your Torn Scales from being banished. Its ability to modulate levels can come up sometimes if you want to go into like a Nightmare, Redoer, or even an Abyss Dweller, but it mainly helps you get bodies on board to go into your Appaloosa. I know the guy who got top 16 at the remote YCS ran Abyss Dweller, but in the videos I found of him on YouTube showcasing the deck, he hasn't mentioned how often he was able to bring out Abyss Dweller in his build of the deck, or how easy it was to make it, since I don't know too much about the iSold builds, to be honest with you guys. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't know how much it came up, since he never said how often he went into it at the remote YCS. Overall, I think that Stained Greaves is a very useful as an extra extender to search from the deck once you have already dedicated your Boot special summon and need to keep on comboing. It isn't that bricky because at worst it's just generic fodder for your Cherubini plays. Well, at that point, it's just another generic extender. Like if you just had to normal summon Kagamucha Knight and then just go into a psychic extender, it's pretty much like that, but it's a Phantom Knight name though. Just keeps you from in case if it's just insurance in a nutshell, basically, in case if you had to use up your Silent Boots early already. But yeah, so that ends the video, guys. Feel free to disagree with me, as these are just my opinions. If you thought this video was useful, please drop a like, subscription, and share it with the other Phantom Knight players. I'm sorry for a little bit of stuttering at times throughout the video, or odd word choices. I was reading this mostly through an essay I kind of made. It's 11 pages long, by the way, so I'm working on trying to get better at my speech, since I haven't really been to school in about a year. I took all my classes online, but I never really socialize a lot because I'm a little bit antisocial and an introvert. But with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Share with other Phantom Knight players. And with that being said, have a nice day.